Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Carmine's Arena, a cultural gourmet of information, if you will, a feast for your mind and soul. And now, without further delay, the man, the myth, the maestro, Carmine Arena.
Greetings, my friends, and welcome to Carmine's Arena, site of contest and conflict, venue for and of resolution. Resolution in terms of focus, remedy, and commitment, both yours and mine, to the preservation, the propagation, and the celebration of Western civilization. A catalogue of man's inhumanity to man merely requires opening a history book or scanning tomorrow's newspaper. What bleeds, leads. The ouch moments drown out the wow ones. Well, let's herald a welcome change in this, my 90th episode of Carmine's Arena. Let us chat about what we'll call the wow effect, as opposed to the now defect. How it is that commencing with seemingly very little, what was illumined was the greatness of our species. Revealed is man's imagination, ingenuity, man's sublimity. Against the odds, then, the wow effect trumps the now defect, for the now defect is precisely defective due to the mischief attendant on instant gratification as opposed to making haste slowly. Such a pace promises mastery of one's gifts, gifts productive of our wow moments. I turn now to my first wow example, Emily Dickinson, who left us with a prolific 1,775 poems. She was a lady who was so rarely to leave her familial home, which she shared with her sister Lavinia, a sister who lovingly cared for Emily's poems upon the poet's death in Amherst, Massachusetts, in 1886. I invite you to quietly listen to one of her revelatory verses. And here it is that I quote. I stepped from plank to plank, a slow and cautious way. The stars above my head, I felt about my feet the sea. I knew not, but the next would be my final inch. This gave me that precarious gait some call experience. Yes, oh yes, despite her circumscribed spinster's life, walking tall and bravely, she became a wholly new order of poet whose craft continues to wow us. She remains a true original whose artistic dimensions up to this very moment puzzle any measuring mechanism of critical description or summation. Yes, I am certain we all know people who are in constant travel mode, yet who have the cerebral depth of an empty gas tank. For those who live everywhere, live nowhere. Dickinson reminds one that in solitude and by reading and through thought, the world can come to you. that world can be subsumed by you, that the unheard knock at your door is heard only by yourself. You answer, and in walks what Emily Dickinson would wisely call experience. Another wow effect I would like to share with you comes by way of the Greek historian Polybius. The historian reports that the well-equipped Roman army encountered the terrifying trumpets and horns of the Celts, which, along with the alarming sight of the tall, blond, naked warriors charging forward full speed ahead, help lead the Romans to scatter and flee in utter defeat. Imagine defeating this world power with, again, so darn little. One might say, so barely little. These blond, naked warriors, I like to imagine, are the male precursors of the scantily clad Chippendales, who in our day attack to defeat a far deadlier enemy called woman. The Celts were never to be defeated, of course, as the Englishman G.K. Chesterton was to observe, and I quote, "For the great Gaels of Ireland are the men that God made mad, for all their wars are merry, and all their songs are sad." Unquote. Though noise doesn't frighten as it once did, more's the pity, for it shows clearly the degree of insensitivity that has befallen our stricken eardrums. Now, turning to eardrums better served, allow me to relate my next wow moment example. In 1940, the celebrated composer Olivier Messiaen was 31 years of age when France was to enter World War II. He was captured by the German army in June 1940 and imprisoned in Stalag 7A. While there, early on, he completed a piano quartet composed for the keyboard, a clarinet, viola, and cello. This is a fairly rare combination of forces, but all he had to work with. The three musicians, other than himself, were the only available and viable musicians in the camp. The architecture of the quartet is both musical and mystical. It was inspired by the book of Revelation, chapter 10, where the seventh angel descends, and at the sound of whose trumpet heralds the end of the past and future, and the beginning of eternity. Quartet for the End of Time. This masterpiece lasts for about 50 minutes and was performed in the cold, performed on decrepit instruments. For example, the cello, which has a standard 4 strings. In this instance, the cellist and composer may do with only 3 strings. In this work, the end of time itself is ingeniously expressed by the use of irregular beats. There is great difficulty in playing this 8-movement work, but it is a delight to audit and to analyze its mystical logic. The German prison camp's legislated inhumanity was answered by Messiaen not with, "Why me, O Lord?" but instead with, "I love thee." Such be the quiet answer to the ultimate questions of fear and faith. Ironically, the composer and his fellow musicians it must be noted, were protected by a prison guard who was in his heart of hearts an anti-Nazi, and who saved many of the other inmates. But that's another wow story for another time when I shall attend to revealing the creative and intellectual miracles that emanated from prison camps, where from so little, from abject need, there nevertheless arose human sublimity. 'Tis well to reflect that the crimes against humanity, that crime itself, is not merely criminal, but blasphemous. For God-given life was bestowed to advance oneself so as also to enrich another's experience. There's that word again. Thus, consequently, thereafter, to inspire questing pilgrims, not produce molested victims. Such is our duty and destiny, else life becomes an obscenity. Hear now from another musician of singular genius, who, having lost his hearing, yet became our endless inspiration through music. I, of course, am referring to none other than Ludwig van Beethoven. Listen as I quote him. "Then let us do what is right, strive with all our might toward the unattainable, develop as fully as we can the gifts God has given us, and never stop learning." Unquote. Ah, yes, to be endlessly teachable is to become truly significant, perhaps like Beethoven, eternally significant. Another eternally significant and influential man of music was Louis Armstrong, who began his journey into sound with a beat-up trumpet still preserved and on view in New Orleans. His beginnings in that historic region reflect my contentions regarding the genius of place and location's incalculable effects. Imagine Armstrong having been born in Amherst, Massachusetts, and Emily Dickinson in New Orleans. They certainly would have become different people. But in New Orleans, Armstrong became Satchmo. Satchmo, who was to surpass his ancestors in jazz and make poetry of poverty and poetry of invisibility, and carry a folk genre to aesthetic refinement and high modernism. Starting again with so little, and against cultural odds, his imagination, suffused with intellect and intuition, achieved human sublimity. When you have a chance, get hold of Armstrong's playing and singing. What did I do to be so black and blue? In very fact, this composition deeply influenced another informed inspiration. And that is the masterful historical novel entitled The Invisible Man by the African-American man of letters, Ralph Ellison, a gentleman who in The Invisible Man transformed literary style into a riff which reflects verbal jazz. The artistry and energy of that singular book marks a perpetual mockery of contemporary race-related rhetoric, whose trumpeting is shrill, grossly insincere, and out of tune. Rhetoric whose words don't seek broader avenues, but higher revenues for its irreverent speakers. Another wow moment, in fact, many wow moments come to be witnessed while contemplating the works of Vincent van Gogh. A classic case of starting and ending with so little and against countless psychological obstacles, yet leaving the entire world endlessly rapt and engaged while contemplating masterpiece after masterpiece, depicting his simple bedroom, a pair of shoes, excuse me, a vase of sunflowers, and revelatory self-portraits. His only lifelong helpmate was his loving brother, Theo, who died exactly 1 year after his brother, Vincent. Why, Vincent's very own mother continued to disparage her son until shocked when after his death she herself lived long enough to witness the reverential accord lavished upon his surviving works, regretting that she, Vincent's mother, disposed as so much garbage, bundle after bundle of his early efforts which undoubtedly would constitute today's seminal treasures. Van Gogh was by all accounts considered a troubled soul. Yet his letters and writings alone, and apart from his paintings, reveal a clarity of expression that is piercingly and brightly memorable and precise. While long ago, reading Ulysses, that literary masterpiece by James Joyce, I am at present reminded of a passage in that work which I believe aptly describes Van Gogh and those of his ilk, an ilk who can paint the invisible like the atmosphere and the very air we breathe. Joyce remarked that a man of genius makes no mistakes. His errors are volitional and are the portals of discovery. On reading and remembering that phrase, one can only respond, wow. You see, my friends, genius is our excuse for existing, our only excuse against man's repetitive inhumanity to man, a species that preys on itself instead of preying on its knees. When I was a child, which seems like yesterday, a child going to public school, I'd hear church bells while walking to my daily weekday destination, carrying my books and my dreams. Once there, I'd stand along with my classmates for the Pledge of Allegiance and a reading of a passage from the Old Testament, newly chosen that morning by our principal who addressed us over the loudspeaker. With heads bowed, we listened in total absence of fidgeting. All of us, including teachers and principals, either consciously or unconsciously understood that there was a power greater than ourselves. This ritual has been abandoned, and our schools are now run by inmates, no longer a student body. We have spawned in our hubris and hauteur undisciplined generations of self-serving, self-projected, self-referential brats, graduating to brutes who ironically never, in spite of relentless selfishness, never discover who they are. Instead of achieving the wow effect, they are stunted by the now defect. But they see, hear, and feel nothing wrong with delusional narcissism. That has overtaken their own image, and unless they pull away from their own mirroring, they will fade into insignificance, much like a misbegotten tattoo. Yes, to think only of self is an obscenity. To live in the absence of achievement is a gross blasphemy. Ultimately, the price is a quiet, unspoken self-belittlement. But let us not despair. For another wow moment, let us turn to look at the tiny nation of Israel. Here I'm going to paraphrase a fellow musician who chairs the piano department at Juilliard, Yoheved Kablinsky by name, and an Israeli citizen. She writes that one would benefit considerably from going to the Middle East and comparing Israel, a technologically, industrially, culturally, and artistically flourishing oasis, as compared to its neighbors. Israel, with no water sources and no natural resources, under adverse circumstances and having to allocate the greater portion of its budget to defense, has been able to achieve a higher standard of living for its citizens, and has been one of the greatest contributors to world medical and scientific research, not to mention its robust, flourishing orchestras, opera companies, theaters, and universities. Its neighbors, by comparison, with their enormous natural resources and oil, boast an obscene disparity between the rich governments and the destitute population. Though treated with hatred and scorn, the Jews of this tiny nation make its medical resources and humanitarian aid available to Palestinians in need. Unfortunately, these stories rarely reach the pages of the New York Times, which much prefers reporting crime, grime, and political slime. Allow me at this juncture to invite you to go online and Google Benjamin Solomon Carson, M.D. This African-American gentleman with gifted hands has saved and changed lives for the better. Born to a divorced single mother and living in poverty, his mother refused welfare. She viewed as slavery on the government plantation. Instead, she daily worked at 3 jobs. With only a 3rd-grade education, she challenged both her sons to strive for excellence and would tolerate no excuse for failure or self-pity. She stoutly refused to be a moocher or a schnurrer, as my maternal side of the family would have it. Read about Dr. Carson's monumental accomplishments. Read his books. Read about the methods of surgery his expertise developed from not only a mastery of neurosurgery, but oncology, plastic surgery, and pediatrics as well. A professor at Johns Hopkins, who in addition to his many earned degrees, has been awarded, get this, more than 50 honorary doctorates. At another time, I'll be speaking more about this African-American giant who arose undaunted from unpromising beginnings, thanks to his mom, who valiantly refused the role of victim and who made miracles possible. And I'm pleased to note that along with his wife and family, his mom is alive and well as I speak. I began these wow accounts with Emily Dickinson, and who better to end this episode? Listen to her humanity as it reaches out to infinity. The number of this poem is 1053. Here it is, and I quote, "I never saw a moor, I never saw the sea, but know I how the heather looks, and what a billow be. I never spoke to God, nor visited in heaven, yet certain am I of the spot, as if the chart were given." Doesn't that deserve at least a silent wow? I invite you to think of your wow moments. Create them, for the wow moments, wow itself, is short for wonderment, originality, and work. And it comes to me now. It's so strange that I didn't see it before. Turn wow right side up, and what do you get? You get Mom. I better think about that. I'm headed in the right direction, I'm sure. Till next we meet, my friends, keep the faith.
If you have any comments or other remarks, and that I perhaps could even read on some of these broadcasts, please do not hesitate to write to me, Carmine Arena, P.O. Box 1029, Larchmont, New York, 10538.